barks. Then she runs to the dining room window and gets them on the other side. That's my question. No, that's not I don't think they're wearing shorts. Yeah, they're wearing some. Yeah. That was very nice.
You'll warm yourself.
I felt so happy. Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. So it looks like we'll have a cozy event today, but in terms of my experience with literary discussions, that can actually be a plus. I'm grateful to all of you who came out here, including my colleagues from the University of Louisville. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Renan Omer Sherman, and I'm Chair of Jewish Studies at U of L, and I couldn't be more excited about hosting Ayelet Tsabari here. Some of you may know this is actually her second visit to Louisville. She first came out here after the publication of her powerful memoir, The Art of Leaving, which is another book that you might want to pick up one day. I want to warmly thank Rabbi David, Benji Berlot, Kate Stein, and Nancy Chazen of the Temple's very hardworking, very conscientious staff. And finally, my graduate assistant, Diana Wilder, for all of their dedication putting this event together today. Ayelet Tsabari's fiction and nonfiction have received numerous awards. Her stunning collection of short stories, the first thing I read of hers, The Best Place on Earth, was named a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice, also received the Kirkus Review Best Debut Fiction mention, and her new novel won the National Jewish Book Award for Fiction, most deservedly. Also the Association of Jewish Libraries Fiction Award, as well as the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Fiction. Born in Israel into a large family of Yemeni descent, she's become known as one of the most vibrant writers among Israelis who choose to write directly in English as opposed through the work of a translator. She's illuminated not only the global expatriate experience of many younger Jewish writers, but the sheer restlessness of Israel's young people who often find themselves torn over the very meaning of home. Having returned some years ago to live in Israel, she still bears a distinct outsider sensibility and the rich cultural experiences one gains from living a very long time and traveling abroad. Most importantly, though, she's raised the awareness of many in writing so evocatively as she does about the sharp social disparities between Mizrahi and Ashkenazim Jews in Israel, about her grandparents' ordeal in immigrating to Israel from their homeland in Yemen, the painful early loss of a father, and perhaps most memorably, the lives of Yemenite women past and present. Her work provides captivating windows into Israeli culture and a great deal more. Her memoir, The Art of Leaving, takes readers on an extraordinarily personal, intimate journey through India, Europe, the US, and Canada, as well as the distances of family memory that can take many surprising and intimate twists and turns. It's truly an irresistible odyssey of wanderlust and homecoming, loss and love, the homes that we choose and the homes that claim us. And now, in this great novel, Songs for the Brokenhearted, she's proved herself to be really one of the most exciting intergenerational Jewish voices in memory. She transports us, in the words of one critic, from the dire conditions in the immigrant camps, the Yemenite children affair, the orphans decree, polygamy, racism against Yemenites and Mizrahim more widely, the aftermath of the Oslo Peace Accords, the rise of Mizrahi scholarship, and perhaps most fascinatingly, the incredible collaborative tradition of Yemenite women's songs, or the stories of people who were illiterate but still aspired to share their experiences artfully for generations to come. Those of you who haven't yet read it definitely have a serious treat in store. Thanks again for coming out today. Ayelet Tsabari, let's welcome her.
Thank you.
It was easy.
Thank you so much, and this was like I'm done. I think you said it all, and so beautifully too. Thank you. I really appreciate it, and thank you all for being here. I'm always I really like this place. It's my second time here, and I discovered that I really enjoy Louisville. Said it right? Okay, good. So hi. I'm going to be talking about my novel, Songs for the Brokenhearted. I have said dramatically before, because I'm a writer and that's what we do, that it feels like the novel I was born to write. It is a love song to my Jewish Yemeni community. It takes place in the neighborhood where my grandparents lived, where my parents were born, and where I spent a lot of my childhood. It is set in the 50s and the 90s, both times of great turmoil and great hope in Israel. And it's a novel about mothers and daughters, about family secrets, about voice and voicelessness. And it's also a love story, multiple love stories actually. But let's go back to the beginning. So I was born and raised in Israel, like Renan said, to a large family of Yemeni descent. This is me as a child dressed in traditional Yemeni clothing. These are my parents at their wedding, and below you'll see my grandparents and the 5 children they had at the time. My mom is the pouty one on the bottom. My grandparents had immigrated to mandatory Palestine in 1934, so earlier than the big, migration that the book is talking about, the 48, 49. This is like actually, I don't know if you can see it as well. I don't know what you see there, so it's kind of weird. But they came from a place called Haydan Asham, which was a day's ride on a donkey's back, as my grandma told me when I asked, from the city of Saada by the border with Saudi Arabia. The Jewish communities in Yemen were very different at the time because they were so isolated. It was so hard to, and so spread out. It was difficult to get from one to the other. This is the journey they took, basically. I can't see, I don't have a thing. But yeah, you can see Saudi there, Yemen just under Saudi Arabia there, and then they took a boat all the way through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal to Port Said in Egypt, and from there to Haifa. Benji was so sweet, he got me a heater, and now I'm getting too hot, so just a sec. So these are the only photos I've ever found from the village where my family came from Haydan Asham. They were taken by Tzion Ozeri. He's a photographer, an Israeli-American photographer who was fortunate enough to be able to travel to Yemen in the 90s. He takes photos of remote Jewish communities in the world. Highly recommend you check him out. But it is, significant because for a long, long time when I started looking and researching into Yemeni history, I could not find anything about Haydan Asham. Maybe it was just how I spelt it or how I transliterated the name or whatever. And that was indicative of like the fact that Jewish Yemeni history was really not that documented. In rural century Yemen, in the 19th century, the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, there were no documents and there were no photos taken, so it was a very hard thing to start doing. Nowadays, these are some of the photos from there. This is the houses that are built of mud, of dried mud. That was, when my grandfather came to Israel, he actually did that. He built a house out of mud because that's what he knew how to do. And this one is my favorite. This is a cheder. where the Jewish boys went to learn. And it was in a cave because the surrounding mountains around Haida Nasham were freckled with caves, and they would, like, shopkeepers would have shops there, and silversmith and so on. And this is the Mori teaching the boys only the Torah. So I grew up in a neighborhood in a suburb east of Tel Aviv, a neighborhood mostly inhabited by Yemeni Jews, and adjacent to Sha'ariya, the neighborhood that is in the book, and where my grandparents lived, and where, like I said, was a big part of my childhood. And singing was a really big part of our lives growing up. We sang in Kiddush, we sang around the house. My mom would sing while she cleaned and while she cooked. And every Saturday I would wake up to the sounds of men singing from the synagogue down the street, because those of you who've heard the Yemeni prayer, it's very melodious, very musical sounding. And it was just kind of the sound that would waft into my room as a child growing up. This is my grandmother's house. At this point, she was no longer living in it. It's abandoned. The scene of many childhood memories. It was the fourth house built in the neighborhood at the time. That's not the mud house. The mud house was since destroyed, but I remember it as a child. I remember walking in it. I remember touching the walls and feeling kind of the earthness of it. But that house, you know, I don't know how many of you read the book, but that house for me was kind of the inspiration for Zohara and Saida's house, the house Zohara grew up in. So in Israel, Yemenis were known for their singing voices. Out of the 4 winners representing Israel in the Eurovision contest over the years, 3 were Yemenis. That's a lot. In 1978, Izhar Cohen won with Abani B. In 1979, Gali Atari and the band, what was the name of the band? Khalav Udvash, maybe? Yeah. What's that? Hallelujah. No, Hallelujah was the song, but the band, I think it was Khalav Udvash. Yeah. So they won first place as well, and Dana International, of course, in 1998. But probably the most famous Yemeni singer and beloved was Ofra Chaza, who came second, by the way, in '83 in the Eurovision contest. Ofra Chaza was the youngest daughter to a large family of Yemeni immigrants to Israel. She was the 9th child, and she grew up in an impoverished neighborhood in South Tel Aviv, and she became the first musical artist to bring the sounds of Yemeni traditional, Jewish Yemeni traditional music to the world in this album that you see here, Yemeni songs. It was a remix of traditional music. What Yemenis were not known for is writing. At least not prose. I'll get to that later. And even reading for pleasure was a foreign concept. The only books you could find in my grandparents' home were holy books. Yemeni Jews were deeply devout. And as a girl who dreamt of becoming a writer, that was discouraging. I started writing at a very early age. These are pictures of my notebooks, where the books that I've written, the novels I've written as a kid, with very dramatic titles like Sad Smile, and All the Beginnings Are Hard. I was also an avid reader growing up, but in all the books that I've read, never found a character like me. I couldn't name a single Yemeni author. My literary heroines were all Ashkenazi, and the books I cherished and loved as a child were all written by Ashkenazi authors. My own father was a budding poet who gave up his literary dreams to pursue a more practical and pragmatic career. He became a lawyer. And after he died, I went to his office in downtown Petah Tikva, which is funny to those of you who know Petah Tikva. It's not really a downtown. But I found a notebook in one of his drawers, and it was filled with his youthful poetry. And there was one line, this is not the line, I couldn't find it when I was looking for it, but that's another beautiful poem that I love about writing poetry. But I found a line that said this: "A poet's craft is an artist's kingdom, not for you, son of Yemen." It broke my heart. I knew he couldn't imagine becoming a writer because he had no role models in our community to look up to. Now, even in history classes, very little was mentioned in terms of Mizrahi history. This is a picture of, it's called 9 out of 400. It's an artwork by Meir Gal. And what the person in the picture is holding is the history book that was assigned to students, to high school students in the 70s and the 80s. And these are the 9 pages out of 400-page book that are dedicated to Mizrahi history. So that meant that by the time I graduated, I could cite the dates of the European immigration to Israel in great detail, but I knew next to nothing about my own history and my own heritage. Not seeing myself in Israeli literature and in the books that they assigned to us in school, basically it said to me that my voice and our story and our memory and our history didn't matter. What I didn't know at the time was that for Yemeni Jews, the art of singing and writing was entwined. So I moved to Canada at 25, and that's when I started reading in English. And of course, immediately found out that there are no Mizrahi Jews in the books written in English, never any. It was even narrower, the representation than what I found in Hebrew. I showed a picture before of me dressed in Yemeni clothing, but what I didn't tell you is that this was a Purim costume, one that was passed on between the cousins. In fact, I have a picture of myself in this cow outfit the year before. That was basically the extent of my interest in my Yemeni heritage. Just something that I could wear, for fun. But it was actually being in Canada and feeling so distant and so rootless and so afloat that made me feel more drawn to my past. I needed something to anchor me in the foreign settings. I found myself longing for my heritage, and I started hanging out. Every time I came home, I started spending more time with my grandmother and asking her questions and interviewing her. I write in my memoir that as a child, hanging out with my grandmother was not my idea of a good time. Her house had no toys, no candy, and of course we had a huge gap, not just a generational gap, but a language gap. I could barely understand her heavily accented Hebrew, and she struggled to understand me. But moving to Canada and becoming an immigrant and learning to live in a new language and seeing just how hard it was, even for me who knew English, it made me reflect on my grandparents' experience and made me see them in a whole new light and understand the struggles they had faced in Israel in ways that I just couldn't before. I love this picture of her. This is a picture I took outside of her house during that time when I was interviewing her. I love this picture too. First of all, because it proves that I had straight hair once. But when I'm about 6 or 7 here, and my grandmother, I'm guessing, is in her 70s, of course. Like I said, no birth certificates, so no real way of knowing her age. And in this picture, we are both practicing the alphabet. We are both learning to read and write, because my grandmother decided the Yemeni women, the Jewish Yemeni women and the Yemeni women were illiterate. They were not allowed to go to school. The Jewish women were not allowed to pray, and she decided she wanted to learn. So I'm like, I see myself here as sitting in a bit of a teaching pose, and I kind of sense that she's annoyed by it. But that is kind of her resting face, I would say. Was. I should also say that she was able to maybe by the end of this read, storefront signs and maybe like headlines and in newspaper, but she was never able to read a book. So I mentioned that I started talking to her and I started interviewing her. This is a picture from those videos that I recorded. So happy that I have those. She died a couple years after that. When I started asking her those questions on videos, she wasn't sure about it at first. I think she seemed to think that her stories didn't matter either. And that's a really common thing. I've read like academic studies about, talking to elderly Mizrahi women immigrants. There was one that was titled "My Life?" ? There is nothing to tell. If you look it up, you'll find it. It's a beautiful, beautiful academic essay. But at first she would give me monosyllable answers. Like I would ask her, how long was the trip? And she'd say long. I was like, months, weeks? She's like, months, but at the end, my persistence paid off. And she started telling me stories. And this was the closest we have ever been. And I'm just so, so grateful for that time. And in my memoir, by the way, I was able to lift entire conversations and put them in. So I started, like I said, with research into family history. Every family has their, the family historian. I became the one. And that led me to further research. And for over 10 years, I researched independently into, the history and the culture and the language and the traditions of Yemeni Jews. It was never a specific project that I had in mind. In fact, at the time, I wasn't even writing. I came to Canada at 25. It's a topic for an entirely, I in fact did give an entire lecture just on that, just on the writing in English. Living in Canada, living in English led to a writing block that lasted nearly a decade. I mentioned before I started writing at a very early age. I used to joke that it came built in. But I felt like I felt like writing in English was inconceivable at the time, but my Hebrew was also not being used. I came to Vancouver at a time when there was no social media, so no kind of direct connection to the language and to the place. I didn't know there weren't hardly any Israelis in town at the time. And I was living entirely in English, so my Hebrew was becoming atrophied, but my English was still not good enough. And when I finally started to write in English, and that, like I said, it was a gradual process. I'm just not going to get into it unless it comes up in questions. But when I started writing in English, I didn't write about my community. Partially, I guess, because, not seeing myself in literature, not seeing my community in literature, I didn't think it was possible. I also didn't really want to write about Israel. That seemed like too hot to touch. So I was trying to write Canadian stories. That wasn't going very well for me. And at some point when I just kind of listened to what was really, needed to happen, and what the writing that was actually kind of trying to come out, and started to write about my people and our traditions, I couldn't stop. And I think that's when the idea of writing a great Jewish Yemeni novel started to take root. It's Black on Purpose. I always knew that more specifically I wanted to write about the women. I come from a family of such strong, female role models. Aunts and my grandmother and a bunch of older female cousins, and I deeply admired them. You know, they felt like this kind of sisterhood that I wanted to be a part of. And like I mentioned before, relying on libraries and archives to glean our history wasn't very successful. It was kind of frustrating, in fact. The Israeli history books didn't offer much. But the dearth of written narratives is always more glaring when it comes to women, right? And in this situation, we're talking about illiterate women, meaning that they didn't write their stories. So there was nowhere to go to but the women themselves. So I decided that's what I want to do. I want to go and interview elderly women the same way that I interviewed my grandmother. And I applied for a grant. It's a wonderful Canadian grant called Chalmers Grant. And it's not for a specific project. Usually when writers apply for grants, they are offering, you know, I'm writing a book about this and that, and I need a funding for that. But no, this was for a larger topic that just informs your work in general. And I said, this is what I want to know. I want to talk to women. I want to hear about their stories. I want to write down their recipes. I want to, you know, I want their traditions. I want their folkloric wisdom. I want it all. And I got the grant. And for over 2 years, 2014 and 2015, I traveled to Israel twice. And I basically drove around villages and communities where there were lots of Yemenis. A lot of it was not like, you don't call them because, you know, they didn't really do phones. They definitely weren't doing emails. You just had to kind of show up, drive around, and they'll be like, you know, come and have some food. And then they would tell me, oh, you should go talk to that person, and you should go to talk to this woman. And that's mostly how it went. I'll show you some of the photos of the people, mostly women, but that I interviewed during those time. So many of the stories that the women were telling me were heartbreaking. Many of them were child brides. Some, like my own grandmother, were married off to circumvent the orphan decree, which had the Yemeni authorities convert Jewish orphans to Islam. But also, it was just common practice to marry children. It's important to note. Some told me about living as a second or a third wife, about husbands and mothers-in-law who abused them. I cried with them while they were telling me of the babies that had been taken from them, disappeared from the immigrant camps in Israel, the unresolved tragedy that Renan mentioned, known as the Yemeni Balkan and Mizrahi affair, Mizrahi children affair. This is Kadia. She was one of my favorite subjects. She was my grandmother's cousin, actually. Very different personality. As soon as we came unannounced, she insisted on feeding us. And this is the food that she gave us. This is lahoch. It's like kind of like injera. And this is her daughter, Saida. They came late. They came in the 60s, so you can see that they were dressed more traditionally. More than my grandmother, for example, who wasn't wearing the pants, like the embroidered pants, like you can see here. And they were also lucky enough to be able to have some of the jewelry, because the Yemeni Jewish craft was just something phenomenal that is now lost, because in Yemen, the men were artisans and craftsmen. This was their role in society. And if you know a Yemeni person, just ask them if there's a silversmith in their family, and they're probably going to say yes. But most of them, my grandma used to say, oh, I was covered from head to toe. I had them even on my ankles and my feet, but they weren't able to bring them. And in some cases they tried, and we're told, like, the planes are not going to make it, you should leave them with us, and then they never saw them again. But Saida and her mom were able to bring some of the jewelry with them. And she's showing off, in a minute I have another picture of her showing off a beautiful necklace. And because they came later and preserved some of their old ways, they had an outdoor kitchen like they had in Yemen, and this is where they make the pitas in a tabun and so on. And yeah, this is the necklace. These are coins from Saudi Arabia. Like I said, Saada, they came from the same area. Saada and Khaidan were very close to the border with Saudi Arabia. So many of the stories that I heard from these women ended up in the book. I wove them into scenes like conversation that Zohara was having with a group of elderly women in the neighborhood community center. There's a moment where they all talk about their marriages and pregnancies and so on. These are lifted from conversations I had with the women. Or there's another scene where Zohara and her classmates are talking about the missing children, and each one of the kids in the class have a story about, oh, my grandmother told me this, and my aunt told me this. Again, stories that I heard and placed in the book. This was my way of kind of honoring their stories, and the women that told me the stories. One of my favorite questions was asking them about their dreams. One described that she was herding sheep on a hill. She was a child after the migration. It was in Israel, and watching enviously as other girls went to school. There was an illiterate woman in a northern village that told me she thought she would have made a good psychologist. That people tell her she gives good advice and she's a good listener. One of them just really wished she could drive. This is Saida again in a different visit. Often the women burst into song. They'd grab a pot and drum on it for rhythm. And I didn't understand the Yemeni Arabic lyrics. I know some of it, and I could pick up a word or two, but I didn't understand it completely. But it didn't matter. Like I felt it. I felt the pain, I felt the longing, and I felt the depth of emotion. So I have some sound clips for you. For example.
يا بنت الخوباني بصورها ليهوى عيان طياني بصورها ليهوى عيان طياني. أنت تعرف ما في روش ملا؟
No, Mel. Oh, she's explaining to me what it means.
يلدا يفا.
And sure enough, it's a love song.
يا بنت.
And it was during those trips, like I said, people kept telling me, go here and go there. Someone told me, you have to meet Gila Bishari. And I did. I went to see her. She lives in a village by Jerusalem. And Gila Bishari is a singer, hugely underrated. And I'll play a little clip for you in a minute. And she became my portal into the tradition of the Yemeni women's song. She performs in venues all over Israel. She's performed in the world as well, and this is her album Zafa, which compiled traditional Yemeni Jewish tunes. This is just her, by the way, singing. She's teaching me, which I'll get to the teaching in a minute. But this is just her singing to my little recorder, okay? This is not anything professional.
يا حبيبي يا لبيب يا جلجلانا الخزاني يا حبيبي يا لبيب يا جلجلانا الخزالي شاشهادنا كحبيبي هي لو تقوم القيامة شاشهادنا كحبيبي هي لو تقوم القيامة خلاني ما.
I'll stop here. You can find more online. This is Gila writing on a piece of paper. You can see that the song is written in Yemeni, Judeo-Arabic was written in Hebrew alphabet. So this is the Judeo-Arabic, the song, and to the left, she's provided me with the translation. So when I met Gila for the first time, she explained to me that there are two different traditions. There's the men's tradition and there's the women's tradition. Now, obviously, like I said, I've heard those songs growing up. But similarly to Zohara in the book, I didn't really understand the intricacies of it. I didn't get that there was two separate traditions and what characterizes them. And she explained to me that the men's tradition, the men sang in Hebrew, sometimes Aramaic, sometimes in Arabic, but mostly in Hebrew. And their songs were devotional in nature. They were about God, and they were about longing to return to Zion, and about redemption. Those of you who know Shabazi, who sang, some of the songs that Ofer Haza sang, Imninalu, for example, this is the men's songs. And they were collected in a diwan, which was a collection of liturgical poetry. Some of it is like 400 years old. The women's songs were sung in Arabic. The women didn't speak Hebrew, they didn't know Hebrew. They were not allowed to pray. And they were oral tradition, again, because they were illiterate. And they were about love, mostly, and about betrayal, and about sorrow, and about a horrible first wife. And some of them had humor. And sometimes it was about desire, and it was about forbidden love, right? It was full of emotion. And similarly to many other oral traditions in the world, it was passed on from mother to daughter. I was just fascinated by that. Oh, and also very cool, they changed a little bit every time. So every time the poetess, which is how they called the meshoreret, the one who was singing, because it was a kind of a call and response thing, every time whoever got it in her hands changed it a little bit, And sometimes she would take a line from a different poem and another line from another poem, or dress a different melody on lyrics that are known, and so on. Very dynamic, always changing. And I remember I drove away from Gila that day, and I had two major epiphanies. The first one was, it's not enough to just learn about it theoretically, academically. You're a Jewish Yemeni woman, you need to learn the songs. And the second one, maybe it wasn't quite an epiphany yet, but it was an inkling that the songs are going to play a major part, in the novel that I was just starting to envision at the time. So I began taking lessons. This is me in 15 seconds of fame on TV with Gila. I sang on television for a second, maybe a line. And learning the songs enabled me to sometimes join women as I was visiting them. So this is a group of women that I met in Rosh Hashanah, and here we're singing together.
بنيادا بهاجاسي قد حملت ميعاطف والما على راسي قد حملت ميعاطف والما على راسي لو زال والغاب.
Now it's funny, it sounds like a happy song. It's not a happy song. It's a song, it's like, Mom and Dad, why did you sell me? Right? Yeah. Because it was not really sell, but it was the way that the bride's price was given to parents. Like, there's a word for it. What do you call it in English? I forgot. Yeah. But yeah, it's because, like I said, lots of heartbreak, hence the songs for the brokenhearted. Lots of pain in those songs. Now, I don't remember, I'm aware of the time, by the way. Yeah. I don't remember the exact moment that the third epiphany happened, but it was perhaps the most important one. Growing up, I used to envy, and even not growing up, even later on in life, I used to envy my friends for their literary heritage. I didn't have one. You know, just not just Ashkenazi, but even like my friends in Canada, like European friends. Like, I just didn't have a heritage, a tradition, an inherited literary tradition that I could call my own. And I realized when I was studying the songs that this was my literary tradition. You know, it may have been unwritten, and it may have been created in a different language, and I'm writing in a whole different language. And yes, it was meant to be sung, but it's a tradition of storytelling. And it was beautiful, and it was rich, and it was dynamic, and it was Jewish, Yemeni, female, and it was mine, you know? And I didn't care that when I researched the tradition, I found that it was often treated as, you know, like folklore and not really poetry. And even in the community, it was compared to the men's tradition and considered lesser, inferior to the men's tradition, right? Which was considered real poetry. Because it dealt with foolish things like love and emotions. And domestic stuff, right? And not higher things like redemption and God. When I started to look at the Yemeni songs, the women's songs as a literary tradition, I realized it has so many things that I love and admire about poetry and about literature. The imaginative use of imagery and metaphor, the often borrowed elements from the natural world. The strong sense of story as expected from, you know, an oral tradition, and the display of raw and honest emotion, because that is something that I really struggled with in Canada. As someone who came of age as a writer in Canada, I often felt that my writing was too much. I was told that by people. I remember one of my first workshop sessions ever, one of my peers wrote on the margins, "It's only the first page and already it's too much." My writing had been critiqued sometimes as sentimental, a label that is often attributed to writers of certain backgrounds, and often to women. And when I first heard that label being attributed to it, I could not understand, because all I wanted was to evoke emotion in the reader, the same way the songs do, and the same way the books that I loved growing up, you know, had done for me. I wanted to cry when I was reading as a child, right? This is why I read and why I consume art. I want to feel deeply. And the songs also appealed to the romantic in me. The book is about many things, but like I said at the end of the introduction, that it's mostly about love. Not only there are two epic major love stories in the novel, but there's also familial love, and there's sisterly love, and the love between grandmother and her grandson, and friendship. And finally, the spirit of collaboration, of making art as a community. I just find it so inspiring. The ritual of storytelling and singing was how the women came together. It's while they were doing housework or craft work. That's how they shared their joys and their sorrows. And I felt buoyed by that discovery, as if I was supported by a sisterhood of women who came before me. And finally, this discovery helped me understand something that I was struggling with. I mentioned before all these strong women that I was raised with. They were loud and they were opinionated. They are loud and opinionated and stubborn, and they're just badasses. And then again, I know that Yemeni women were so oppressed, and silenced. And there was this contradiction that I really struggled to make sense of. And when I discovered the songs, I realized there was something so audacious, rebellious, and subversive almost about that insistence to be heard, to create and own their narrative in a patriarchal society that, doesn't give them any space to sound their voice. And it also allowed them to express thoughts and emotions that were perhaps considered indecent or inappropriate, but they could do it through the songs. The day I joined my mother and her sisters in singing around my aunt's kitchen table, I felt like I arrived. The aunts just looked at my mom and they're like, how does she know the songs? And I was just like, well, I'll be learning. So yeah, I think we're kind of out of time.
We can take comments on questions.
Yeah.
And I will just gently begin by gently pushing back. There's a lot of love, many varieties in the novel, but the political is also there.
Yeah.
In very, very harsh and wounding and important ways. I think it's impossible to write a novel set in Israel where that's absent. But
Absolutely.
I think you handle the pre and post Rabin assassination periods incredibly well.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's also about grief, and in grief in many ways. Just like love in many ways, it's about grief in many ways, about national grief and personal grief and so on. But I choose to speak about the love part, unless you ask, and then I would gladly speak about other aspects of it as well. Yeah, I only have 45 minutes, so. Yes, Michael.
So I thought this was really wonderful, and I learned an immense amount. You began by talking about how there just isn't that much written history.
Yeah.
And then you began talking about the songs that seem to be kind of like a type of poetry. And I was curious if you could say something about that proximity between like the song and the poem, and maybe if that becomes its type of writing with your own work.
Wait. Can you repeat the final thing you said?
If your contribution is to kind of turn the song into its own type of writing, so that you kind of address the original lack of writing with your work.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. First of all, I will say that I've heard before that some Yemeni scholars, Jewish Yemeni scholars in Israel, have said if you want to really know about the lives, like the historical lives of Yemeni Jews, you should read the songs. You should, listen to the songs. That's where you get more of the just the domestic, everyday kind of stories of Yemeni Jews in ways that the men's songs don't. And also, it's not written anywhere. So there's a historical contribution as well there. But what I think you asked, and what I will answer, because I'm really excited to tell you about this, and then we didn't get there, is that once I realized that as a Jewish Yemeni woman, I have to learn the songs. I realize I'm acting in a sense as a poetess, and it is my my writing has become a continuation of the tradition, absolutely. So that there's a dissemination that happens there. And so I knew that I had to include the songs in the book for that reason. But then I bumped against several issues of translation. Not only it's a double translation from Hebrew to Arabic, from Arabic to Hebrew, and then from Hebrew to, for me to do the English translation. I should say that's actually really important, and I'm going to show you a picture so you'll know. There's a book, there's a man that collected the songs. His name was Gamlieli, Binyamin Gamlieli, and in the 70s he went around Israel and collected songs from, he started with his wife and his mom, so there was a resource for me that I could look at. So I looked at the songs and I selected the ones that I wanted to use in the book. And I was like, how will I do justice to the songs in this translation into English? Like, what am I going to lose, right? And then, of course, there's the other act of translation from oral to written. You know, I fix it on the page. So much is lost, and already in the book, what I'm taking, it's already an approximation. That's already a fixed version that he collected at the moment. And two things that I realized. The first thing is like, okay, it's always about the balance of like what you lose and what you gain. And I'm like, yes, a lot is lost in translation. The loss is an inherent part of it. But I'm like, so much is there is to gain from having, you know, the songs appear in the book and for people to read them. But the other thing I realized is that if I'm a poetess, I can do stuff to it. I can mess with them, and that's kind of the idea. That would be me being loyal to the tradition. So I did. I would take, like, sometimes I would, you know, mash a couple songs. In one point, not in one point, I think in all the songs, there's at least a little bit that I just added, in the spirit of Saida, but that was not in the original version, right? And once I allowed myself to do that, I felt really liberated by it, and I've started to, you know, have fun and not worry about it so much. So I think that's what you were asking, and I hope you were. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love seeing the way that this talk sort of took so much of the last time you were here and what you were saying and sort of taken it to a new level. And I hope so it was so beautiful. I loved hearing you speak. And I hope my question isn't like something that you don't want to talk about, because you sort of mentioned it and then sort of pivoted the other way. But I'm so curious about, you said that you had sort of 10 years of a writer's block.
Yeah.
And that is just absolutely and utterly inconceivable to me as a different kind of writer. So I'm just wondering, how did you? I mean, obviously you ended up really well, and you crafted and created such magnificent and important works. But how did you get out of that? And what did you do in that 10 years?
So it wasn't 10 years, it was more like 8, I would say. I said nearly. Yeah, I wasn't really unhappy about it. You know, I was like, it felt, I've said before, it felt like a little bit like unrequited love. You know, I was really dramatic about it. Again, with the dramatic, I was just like, oh, you know, a writer stripped of her tools. I was really upset. But I just couldn't, I really couldn't conceive writing in English at the time. It seemed impossible, too big of a task. And I've had people try to tell me otherwise. I've had one woman say to me once, fairly early on, maybe if she came a little bit later, it would have been effective at the moment. But I was like maybe after 1 year in Canada. She said, I said, I need to, first of all, master English. And then I need to become a writer in English. Like, it's just, I can't. And she said, I don't think that's how it works. I think what you need is, you have the storytelling, you have the skills, you already have that. You just need to change the medium. It's like moving from watercolor to acrylic. That was her metaphor. And I it wasn't. It was too early for me to hear it at the time. I think what happened is by the time, after a few years, what was I doing? I don't know. I was just, I don't know, I was waitressing, I was traveling. I wasn't even reading as much at that time, too. It was just kind of like, I was like, you know, I studied photography. I was trying to tell stories in other ways. And film. I tried other things. And then English did start to kind of make itself known in my diary entries and things like that. And then, shout out to Sean, my partner, who's not even here. Can someone record and send? And he basically, when I met him, he asked me to write him a story for our 1 year anniversary. And I thought it was the most annoying thing. I hated him. And I wrote him a story. It was terrible. It was like just, you know, cliche written and really, really flawed in so many ways. But I think something about that kind of freed me, and I started to enjoy writing again, and even enjoy English. So yeah. Yes.
Oh, no, just pronounce your name is Ayelet.
Ayelet.
Hi.
Hi.
Excuse me.
Hi.
Ayelet?
Hi.
All right. My name is Louis, by the way, and this is Cheryl. And,
Nice to meet you.
I'm so glad we're attended this book, I should say, reading or explanation about yourself, motivation. So I have a couple of questions. Number one, what was the impetus for relocating from Israel to Canada? And number two, these were women's songs and then there were men's songs. And the women's songs seem to be about everyday life, and the men's songs are out there in the religious area, more or less. Did the two ever sing to each other? And if so, how were they received?
Okay, thank you. The first answer is easy. There was a guy. There's no longer that guy, but there was a guy, and then we broke up. But I just stayed. I was just kind of, traveling. It wasn't a serious move or anything. I call myself I was an accidental immigrant. The lives of men and women in Yemen were separate. So if men and women sang to one another privately, I'm sure that may have happened, but it wasn't something that was done in the public sphere. You know, it was just the women sang together and the men sang together. But there were a couple men actually over the years who have shown interest in the women's songs. There was at least one that I know that was writing women's songs. His name was Shlomo Muk'a. That was already, I think, in Israel, but maybe he started before. But yeah, and of course Gamlieli, who went around and collected it. So there were some men who recognized the treasure that tradition is. And Gamlieli even writes in the book that there were people trying to dissuade him from this pursuit, being like, "What are you doing? Like, that doesn't matter, you know." But yeah, I don't know about any collaboration happening back then.
What about family get-togethers? People singing?
It depends, because like I mentioned that the communities were so different and segregated. So in places like Sana'a, no, because the men and women were very, very apart. In rural areas in the north where I came from, yeah, sometimes men and women would even like dance, not together physically, but in the same space. So there was a little more, they were a little more lenient in the areas where my family comes from. But it's very, it's distinct. Yeah.
that, I listened to what you said and was like, oh, he was the Alan Lomax of the Yemeni community.
Who's that? Can
So
you-
Alan Lomax, during the Depression when there was like make work, Alan Lomax went around the country recording prison songs and
Oh,
folk songs
wow.
of like just little hidden communities.
That's very cool.
Yeah, they're all, you can find them, like, I think they're probably recorded in the Library of Congress, but I know they've been released. I've got some of the albums.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to me that there was an Alan, I'm so happy that there was an Alan Lomax
Yeah.
in your community. But the other thing I was thinking with the women's songs, and were about the ghazals in Afghanistan,
Mhm.
and I just sort of traditions of women's communities where the women are highly segregated and
Yeah.
not valued, and
Yeah.
find ways of telling the stories and preserving
right.
history.
Yeah, it's by no means specific to, and in fact, like the Yemeni Muslim women's also had their own songs, and I've looked into that as well, and there were some crossovers, but it depends again which area. Was it an area like the rural areas where the women, the Muslim and the Jewish women lived, together, or if they came from areas where they were very separate, then not so much. But the women's songs, the Jewish women's songs, do have some allusions to, say, biblical stories like Yaakov and Rachel and things like that. So there were some things that showed, not in all the songs, but you can find Jewish elements and motifs in some of the Jewish women's songs. But yeah, there are some crossovers between Muslim and Jewish women. And when I've read about it, I've read about Bedouin women. There's those traditions are, yeah, you can find them in other places in the world for sure.
And also you were talking about putting your own stamp, the individual stamps.
Yeah.
And I thought, very peaceful rap battles. So a rap battle is, somebody explain what a rap battle is.
Oh, okay. The
Yeah.
rap battle. Yeah.
Right, yeah, it's like
Yeah.
peaceful fun rap battle.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that like, you had to be a talented poetess to be in that position, because you needed to be able to improvise on the spot, right? Not everyone can do it. So it wasn't so much about your singing talent as it was about your writing exactly and improvising kind of skills.
So smart, I mean, what a beautiful thing that you were able to get there, figure that out, and translate it into that,
Yeah.
that is my tradition.
Yeah,
And
in
express it
the modern. Yeah.
Express it in this way.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yes, Michal. And then
Oh, see,
maybe
go
you.
ahead. I don't want
Yeah?
to take. You go first.
Okay.
So, I was fascinated, everything about this. So the way you framed it as a story that you told us. So the written word is something that I will see tonight when I go home. So I loved how you led us into the book. I'm also fascinated at the idea of translation that you brought into your discussion. It's multifaceted. It is not only between Arabic, Hebrew, and English, but I'm also thinking about the oral and written, the relationship between oral and written stories. So thinking about this beautiful chorus of women that you bring into this book, have you shared some of these stories that come out of their songs with some of them, and in which language?
Shared some of the.
Some of your book. Some of the.
Well, the book is currently not in Hebrew, right? So I guess they know that I'm writing a book, and they know that I've published a book, but they can't read English. I'm working on the Hebrew version now. Yeah, I resist the word translation because it feels different when you're doing your own, first when you're doing your own thing, and secondly when it's your mother tongue that you're working in too. So, but yeah, I'm writing it now in Hebrew, and I'm excited about it being more widely available. And that's why it was also, that's not the only reason, but that's one of the reasons why it was really important for me that I will be doing it and not a translator. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, hang on, I need to not choke. But, okay, so I wanted to make a comment when you were having a discussion about the separation of spheres and separation by gender. And so the argument was that men were doing their own thing and they were doing mainly public sphere adjacent songs, whereas women were doing domestic sphere adjacent songs. And I found that fascinating because one of the examples you gave was about women singing about the babies having been taken away from them. And of course, I'm a sociologist, so we can make the argument that the political is personal, the other way around, but it's really interesting to see the public sphere make, its appearance into the domestic sphere is a policy problem, right? And it's a political issue. And so thinking about these topics that are, and it can be the dowry, right? And it can be a question of an institutional, systematic theft of babies that's being dealt with. And I think that, specifically in the context of the babies, that it is that oral tradition of not losing the memory, of not letting it go, that caused that pressure for the effort to surface, right, and be investigated. And so there's this new, I don't know how familiar you guys are with this, but there really is a movement towards accountability or causing Israel to be accountable for the state's policies at the time, or if it wasn't state policy, then definitely there was something happening there that was systematic. And so I find that fascinating because I don't see, I obviously see the separation of what you're speaking, but I also see those and in the background, there's something that's profoundly political there, right?
Okay, so first of all, a small correction. The women that I met did not sing. They shared. They told me about it. So, but as you were speaking, I was trying to think of newer songs that were written in Israel, because the songs in almost their entirety were written in Yemen before, right? I know at least a couple examples of women that continued to create songs that did not reach because there was no longer that structure, right? So they did not make it far. I know about their songs because there was an interview with them or something like that, but they did not become well-known songs because there is no longer that kind of dissemination and that kind of events that happened, right? But one thing that I thought about, the band Ewa, their second album, it's a band of 3 young Yemeni Israeli women. Their second album, the first album was just remixed songs from the women's tradition, right? So Habib Galbi and all of those songs, they're remixed. They're the same as what Ofal Haza did, basically. Their second album is original, and they created songs in the tradition of the women's songs. And one of those songs mentioned the missing children, in a small way, but that's the only one that I can think of. With the song Ana Mushmil in Yemen, like I'm not from Yemen. This is not Yemen, not Ana Mushmil in Yemen. I don't remember, something like this. This is not Yemen, that's the name of the song. It was quite successful. Yeah, that's the only one that I can think of that does that. And using the women's songs because I feel like it was political, even just because they are, like what I said, there's something subversive about it, just by speaking up, right? Just by being like, this is us, and this is our pains and our sorrows. So I really admired what they did when they in that song in specifically, but in general, of course, yeah.
For those interested interested in hearing more Yemenite songs,
Yeah.
on your website, you have a link?
I have a playlist. Yeah, I have a playlist. But also you can find it on Spotify if you go just Songs for the Brokenhearted with my name and stuff. You should be able to find it. But yeah. Yes.
What made your grandparents come? You said they came in the 20s versus Zahara's family that came in the 50s, put that way. What made your grandparents come, and were they as shocked by the cultural differences as you wrote about in the book?
Yeah, so they came in 34. But in fact, my great-grandma came in 1907. So she came to Ottoman Palestine. It's a kind of a sad story because she left her children and came on her own. A whole different thing. But I don't know much about her, obviously. But yeah, absolutely. Like that's the stories that my grandmother was talking about. Yeah, they were shocked, but also they were spared some of the hardships that those that came in 1948, 1949, and after the founding of Israel experienced, because they didn't have to go to transition camps and immigration camps. The whole story about the missing children, something that did not happen. So it was hard, and they were, okay, can I tell one quick story? Because I feel like I'm going to show you a picture. I feel like we missed out. That's an interesting, no, that's not it. Just give me a sec. I have to find it. Oh man, I did something and I deleted it. I'll just tell you a story. My grandmother and my grandfather, I said, came in 1934. My grandmother was a second wife, and they came, all three of them, and with two children, one from each wife had a child. And when my grandmother came, one of the things, oh my God, there's some really scary bug here. My grandmother looked around and basically understood that it wasn't something, polygamy wasn't practiced in this new place with all these strange fair-skinned Jews, and it just wasn't something that happened. And she used it. She could not stand the first wife. She didn't get along with her at all. So she took her daughter, my aunt, and went to her cousin in Rehovot, and she said to my grandfather, "It's me or her." And a few days later, he followed her, and he left the first wife, who never forgave us, anyone, like my mom's siblings, and they tried to connect with her half sister and all this, but she never allowed it. They had 6 children together, stayed together until he died. And I'm telling this story first because it's, like the polygamy that I mentioned in the book, this is something that is close to my heart, but also it's seeing what we talked about how even the act of telling stories and writing songs and sharing them, that was subversive. When my aunt told me that story, she said she was a feminist. And I remember thinking to myself like, oh, but I see it. I see the strength, and wow, that was bold. That was a hard thing to do. She was in Israel just for not that long. She didn't speak the language. She was in a new place, and she knew to take the opportunity and just take off with a child on her own like this. And I think that's something that in the book Zohara confronts that all the time. That kind of our prejudgments and looking at things from our modern gaze and having to be like, well, wait a second, actually that's incredible strength, and I have a lot to learn from this woman. So yeah, that's I kind of took a different route, but yeah. Yes.
I truly enjoyed your talk, and walking through all this hardship, and I feel like sense of sisterhood. I was wondering if other Jewish community hailing from, let's say, Ethiopia or Iran or other places, not like Europe.
Yeah.
They have the same kind of tradition or way of preserving their past. Like, for example, Jewish women from, Africa or
Yeah.
Middle East, or is it something unique to the Yemenis?
I don't know enough about other Mizrahi traditions, but I do know that the singing was something that I've heard other women tell me, oh, my grandmother used to sing. I heard it from Iraqi women, I've heard it from Iranian women, I've heard it from Moroccan women. So I think the singing was a big part of a way to express, but I don't know enough about it. And I also would say that there seemed to be sort of a renaissance, or I feel like my generation, after a generation that maybe wanted nothing to do with the traditions of the past in their effort to become Israeli and just, just kind of push away the traditions of the past, to erase them even. I feel like the younger generation, my generation now, is being like, wait a second, like, I want this, I want to reclaim, like, I want the stories, I want the songs, I want the traditions, and you can see that there's several musicians in Israel, for example, who are kind of bringing to life. Dudu Tassa is a great example, who's bringing back Iraqi, I think maybe Kurdish music. So there are some examples like that, for sure.
Women or law or the ethnicity.
Yeah.
Preserve this way of preserving their culture, especially women.
Yeah.
And I don't know why they found this, singing and oral tradition as the more powerful way to preserve and spread and transmit to the.
I feel like there's something, again, about voice and voicelessness, what I was saying before, because their voice, like the poet Bracha Seri, it was a Yemeni Jewish poet, said that there was no greater insult for a Yemeni woman than to be considered unquiet. And you see the gap between the boys. The Yemeni boys were like, in the synagogue, they were, just encouraged to project their voices, be louder, and you hear them like when you go and you hear the Yemeni boys, they kind of like yell almost like, and I feel like because they felt so silenced that the singing tradition developed. You know what I mean? That was a way to voice. So I feel like maybe that's the root of it. Yeah. Thank you.
So Ayelet is available to us for book signing, and there's also a section outside, and the conversations can definitely continue. I wanted again to thank all of you for making time today, and especially Ayelet.